Well, good evening. How lovely it is to see you all. You're looking well and happy and ready for another evening of inspiration and blessing. And I wonder how you have gone today with the choices that you have been making. Have you made any different choices in your health habits? Anybody? Let me see your hands. Well, I'm encouraged. I'm seeing hands right from the front, right to the back. What a privilege and what a pleasure. And you know, I was sharing with my good friends as we were driving over to the center. A young man in the hotel, I had breakfast, and I said to him, I really want to find the staircase or the stairs that go up from the breakfast center, which is on the ground level, to my room. Now, I know that I can get there from the third level, but I didn't know how to get there from the first level. So I asked him, and he looked at me, and he looked me up and down, and he probably looked at my gray hair, and he said, you know, sir, right here, this is an elevator. I said, I know what that is. He said, don't you want to use it? I said, no, I don't. Well, he said, let me take you. So he took me quickly up one flight of stairs, and he looked at me again as if he was really worried. I said, what is it, young man? What is it with you? He says, I said, do you think I'm not well? And he nodded his head and smiled. He said, I don't think you're well. But the choices we make determine to a great extent and to an eternal extent, not only our physical life, but our spiritual life. And then, of course, there's the exercise, the liquids we talked about last night. And tonight we're going to talk about another E, and that E is the environment. Now, we have been fearfully and wonderfully made. As you think about this wonderful body that you have been given, it has been beautifully created. You know, one of my background specialties is cardiology, and that's an interest in the heart. And I would see my patients, and I always did my own echocardiogram studies, because as I did that, I would get to know the patient better, talk to them, and sometimes I would just become so fascinated. I would have the probe in my hand and be looking, and they'd say, Doctor, is there something drastically wrong? And I would come back into the circumstance and realize I had been fascinated by this wonderful functioning of this beautifully created pump, which was sitting in the internal environment of the body, which had been created so beautifully. Our bodies have environments which are inside, and then, of course, we have the environment which is outside in which we live. You know, I have a very good friend who at one point in his career wanted to find a house next to a lake. And he went into the countryside of Canada, which is vast and very expansive, and they found these beautiful lakes that were beautifully colored, and then thought, maybe this is the place we need to be. They were a beautiful blue color. But what they ultimately found was that these lakes had been damaged. They were actually dead because of acid rain caused by industrial pollution of the water to such a degree that the lakes had no flora and no fauna. And this is the kind of world we are living in right now. A world which is sometimes even beautiful to look at, but toxic sometimes for any kind of life, such as those lakes which had become absolutely sterile. Life can only flourish in a suitable environment. It requires an appropriate balance of the climate, the water, the soil, and the air. All of those factors that surround us are really important, and water is totally important. Pollution of the water and the air destruction of natural habitats, and we looked at this picture the other evening. This is a very significant picture for us to remember and keep in our minds. There's a huge issue related to the environmental pollution, pollution of water. You know that even those plastic bottles, we'll talk a little more about them, that are so ubiquitous. In other words, they are all over the place. And maybe there'll be some under the chair in which you're sitting at when you walk out tonight. Take it with you, recycle it so that we don't damage our environment. 50 years ago, some of you may remember, some of you were too young, you weren't even born then. There was a lot of lead in the gasoline. That gasoline with lead in it created a lot of problems, and people ended up having lead poisoning, those who were exposed to the fumes from motor cars. There was a lot of neurotoxic damage, and subsequent to that, lead was also added to paint. And children who ate that paint because they would put anything in their mouth that they could 50 years ago, they still do that, but then there was lead in the paint, and that would land up with lead poisoning for those individuals. And because of these significant problems related to lead in the gasoline and the pollution of the atmosphere, there was a decision taken to remove the lead, and now we use lead-free gasoline. Well, that's a step in the right direction, but it's not a solution to everything. You know, a little pollution here, a little destruction of the trees there, the dumping of raw sewage into a river, they may seem to be of little impact, but they have, when put together with all the pollution that is taking place, a major destructive effect. Not only on the environment, but of those of us who live in those environments. It is for that reason that many people are beginning to talk about the issues related to the environmental issues we face. And one of those is the question of overpopulation. Is that an environmental concern? Well, think of it this way. If there was only one automobile, there wouldn't really be a lot of trouble if there was one car. But the more people there are, the more cars there are. The more cars there are, the more gases are produced. The more gas is produced, you see it's an accumulative effect. You may say, well, what's that got to do with the population issue? Well, it's got a lot to do with it. Because looking at current projections, incorporating projected declines in growth rates, even with the fall in birth rates in many parts of the world, we predict that there will be a global population somewhere between 8 and 10.5 billion people on this planet by the year 2050. That's a lot of people. A lot of people that need to be sustained in an environment which is already struggling to sustain the number of people there are. It's going to stretch the sustainable resources and the distribution of those resources, including the water, the air, the food, the shelter. This often damages countries' economies. It damages the opportunities people have of living happy, healthy, and fulfilled life. Farms and forests disappear. Waste pollutes the water, the land, and the air. The overpopulation results in serious difficulties. And you can see that despite these numbers, where there are drops between 1950 and 2005, for example, babies born from 2.6 per lady to 1.4, Sub-Saharan Africa 6.7 down to 5.53, there's still nevertheless an inexorable increase in populations. And these numbers are causing significant issues for sustainable agriculture. Agriculture which provides the food on our tables day by day. Improvements need to be brought about, But we need to realize that the environment is taking a tremendous amount of strain because of pollution, because of our numbers, and because of our lack of concern about caring for the important things around us, including, as mentioned earlier, deforestation. We need forests. Where forests disappear, deserts arrive. Moist forest soils quickly dry out without shade of a forest canopy and can quickly become those deserts. And the role played by the forests in absorbing the greenhouse gases is a critical one. And when there are no trees, that doesn't happen. Now, you may be sitting there wondering, what did we come to listen to this about? We wanted health hints. Well, you really cannot be healthy if you don't live in a healthy environment. In those circumstances, food is not available to all. You know, here's something very interesting. Most scientists agree that there's been a significant warming during the last 100 years, although there are very many opinions as to why that occurs. It may influence food production. Yields of grain have been shown in many situations to vary with temperatures. And right here in the Philippines, the International Rice Research Institute found that rice production declined by 10% for each 1 degree of centigrade increase in the nighttime temperature during the growing season. So there's a significant increase on the production of the food that you eat here in the Philippines because of the changes in temperatures. So you can see that because of the change in the environment, significant issues are facing the citizens of the world. Of course, we've talked about the reliance on fossil fuels. You see that, you know, I look out of my hotel window in the morning and see the traffic welling up, the numbers of cars, and you know, because you travel in that traffic, we do wherever we live, there's a huge pollution taking place. Water and in the air. Industrialization has also added massive amounts of a lot of waste material. This environmental contamination is getting worse and is getting less and less attention seriously. But it should have more and more. We talked a little bit about plastic and how that takes a tremendous amount of time to degrade. You know that the plastic degradation products from these plastic bottles have been found way out in the ocean, tiny little molecules of plastic which remain 30 to 40 feet deep. When you analyze the krill, which is actually the food of much of the marine animals, including fish, you'll find that much of it contains the degradation products of plastic. Interestingly, just a little piece of useless information, the smallest particle from the bottle of water that you throw away, that it gets degraded to, is called a nurdle. And not a noodle, a nurdle. And those are found all over the ocean. We need to take notice of these things because sometimes we are so arrogantly unconscious of how important it is to care for the external environment in which we live. Of course, there's radioactive pollution as well. There are other issues related to hygiene, which is a fundamental health principle. The importance of having clean water. We need to pay attention to this. We need to look to the fact that water sources, wherever we are, they need to be clean, they need to be secured, and they need to be cared for. It's been shown that persons living in polluted regions may not have immediate health problems, but later on, they may develop cancers, lung infections, and even mental retardation. And I was just looking this afternoon at a paper which was looking at the issues related to autism. And they're finding that this is as much related to genetic issues as it is to environmental issues. The birth defects have gone up significantly. Asthma has increased. In fact, within 100-mile circumference of Los Angeles, they find that the young children who've been growing up there over the years have a significant decrease in the development of their lungs because of the air pollution. And I was just talking to a good friend of mine just before this meeting who said that her father chose not to live in that area to give his children the chance of growing up in an environment which had wonderful clean air and less pollution. Asthma rates, all kinds of issues related to the ozone, the pesticide pollution. And this is the kind of world which we are living in right now. Another very important part of our environment is the sun, which keeps us warm, and here in the Philippines keeps us very warm. But it's very important to have that sunlight. If you don't have it, many, many issues arise, not only in our physical bodies, but in the trees. The sunshine is absolutely essential for the production of chlorophyll, for the process of photosynthesis, for the energy production, the production of oxygen. And so all of those things are dependent very significantly on the sun. The sun keeps the temperature good around the earth at a very constant, in a reasonably constant level. And it powers the recycling of water through the evaporation into the clouds. It also is important in the metabolism of vitamin D. We are so wonderfully made. The rays of the sunshine actually change the vitamin D in the skin into the very useful form of vitamin D3, which helps us stay healthy and live well. An appropriate amount of sunshine. What is an appropriate amount of sunshine? Well, if you're pale like I am, you need to be very careful of how much sunshine you get, particularly when you don't have a lot of a canopy on top of your head. And so when you have a little more pigment, a little more color, well, you can afford to be a little more in the sun. But one needs to be careful of excessive exposure, and wherever you are and however pigmented you are, the more exposure to the sun, the more likely you are to develop skin issues, particularly skin cancers. So one needs to be careful. You need to be exposed to the appropriate amount, but not to take too much. Sunlight also stimulates the production of a hormone called serotonin. Serotonin is sometimes called the happy hormone. It's the hormone that makes you feel good about yourself. It's the hormone that makes you feel completely happy, rewarded, and fulfilled. Vitamin D is important in that, and so the sunshine plays a significant role. Now, you won't understand this so well unless you've lived in other countries. In some places where the days get very short, like sometimes 6 or 8 hours of sunlight only, sometimes even less, much less, people sometimes get what is called seasonal affective disorder. And that's abbreviated SAD. What does SAD spell? Sad. And these people actually get sad because they're not exposed to the wonderful environment of sunshine. In fact, seasonal affective disorder was described by a colleague of mine. He was a year ahead of me at medical school, who directly after graduating went to the United States, went straight into psychiatry, and he, Dr. Norman Rosenthal, described this syndrome. And it's very common in countries which have long winters, short days, showing the importance of sunlight in keeping us not only physically healthy, but emotionally happy. Now we've talked about the external environment, but you know, we have each of us an internal environment. And that's the environment that we feed with food. And again, as I've mentioned to you over the last few evenings, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and our bodies are able to keep the environment inside very, very constant. But what we need to do is ensure that we feed that environment with the very best qualities of food, the right foods. We should support that by daily physical activity. Have you heard that before? And a healthful diet rich in unrefined plant foods. We should be very careful not to pollute the internal environment of our bodies with any toxin, but particularly the issue of tobacco smoke. I'd like you to look at this picture. It tells an amazing story of a little girl holding her nose because she doesn't want to have the smell of the cigarettes, the second-hand smoke, which has been shown to be so devastatingly dangerous to people with its hundreds of chemicals. Alcohol is another potent toxin. The psychotropic drugs that affect the nervous system, so-called recreational drugs, they also intoxicate the internal environment. And of course, then there are those many substances which have never been properly tested or evaluated, and those are advertised as being good for you without any evidence. Be careful of using things which are not tested and not studied. The many so-called even natural products, which sometimes can be extremely dangerous. Of course, our health, God's gift to us, is something that we should cherish and guard. The environment is something we should cherish and guard. We are stewards of the earth. But as we live in the earth, which is our macro environment, we think of our bodies, which is our micro environment. I'd like you to pause for a moment and think of your home, which is the environment in which we spend a significant amount of time. Because we are more than mere physical beings and possess intellectual, emotional, and spiritual dimensions, we also need to consider our emotional and spiritual environments in which we live. And our home is that environment. So many homes are sadly places of tension and distrust. Anger and violence in the home will take an enormous toll on the health of our children and of ourselves. And this is an aspect which is not really popular of this talk on environment, and that is on domestic violence. Domestic violence is not only physically abusing each other, it's also emotionally abusing, verbally abusing. And our homes should not be that way. They should be little oases, little havens of security in a world that is polluted by turmoil and other pollutants. Kind and supportive attitudes nurture the emotional health of the family. And what I really want you to grasp as we come to the last few minutes of what I'm going to say is that we are multi-dimensional beings. We have bodies, we have minds, we have emotions, we have our spirit. We are multi-dimensional. And so the things that affect our emotions affect our mental health, affect our physical health, affect our social health. And that is why we are spending a moment to share that with you this evening. The spiritual environment of the home affects the environment of our minds. Our homes should be calm, comforting, and supportive places. The values that are taught there and come from a basis of belief and trust will make a difference not only to your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, your mental health, but you're living forever one day in the earth made new. If you have any doubt as to where this whole world is heading, you need only to look at the extent of the damage and change which has happened to this earth. Something significant is going to happen to bring about the change. And Dr. Wilson is going to tell you more about that as we move through this series. God bless you.